The rushing sound of water filled the Montana spring air as Hannah Atwood's wagon lurched violently to one side, sending her flour sacks and canned goods tumbling. Her 4-year-old daughter Lily clutched her rag doll tighter, eyes wide with terror as the wooden wheels lost purchase on the slick riverbank. It was 1878, and the Gallatin River, usually a predictable crossing this time of year, had swollen overnight from unexpected mountain snowmelt. "Mama." Lily cried, her blonde curls bouncing as she was jostled on the wagon seat. "Hold tight, darling," Hannah commanded, fighting the reins as her 2 horses whinnied in panic. At 26, the young widow had faced plenty of hardship since losing her husband to influenza last winter, but nothing had prepared her for the power of the surging water now lifting her wagon from the ford. The current grabbed the wagon like a hungry beast, dragging it sideways. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as she wrapped one arm around Lily while yanking desperately at the reins with her other hand. The horses, terrified by the rushing water, reared and neighed, only worsening their predicament. "Help!" Hannah screamed, her voice carried away by the wind and water. The nearest homestead was miles away, and the trading post she'd been headed toward sat on the opposite bank, still out of sight around the river bend. She was alone with her child as the wagon began to tip. Vaughn Zimmerman had been tracking a wounded buck since dawn when he heard the distant sound of panicked horses and a woman's scream. The 30-year-old rancher dropped his rifle and ran toward the commotion, his worn boots pounding the earth as he crested the hill overlooking the river crossing. The sight below made his blood run cold. A wagon was being swept downstream, already half submerged, with a woman and small child clinging to the driver's bench. Without hesitation, Vaughn tore off his leather vest and gun belt. He sprinted down the hillside, his muscular frame propelling him faster than most men could manage. Years of breaking horses and driving cattle had honed his body for exactly this kind of physical challenge, though he'd never imagined using his strength to battle a river. "Hold on." He bellowed, though he wasn't sure if they could hear him over the roaring water. Hannah spotted movement on the riverbank, a tall man with dark hair running alongside the water, keeping pace with her drifting wagon. For a moment, hope surged within her. "Please help us." She cried out, clutching Lily tighter as another wave sloshed over the wagon's side, drenching them both. The cold spring water was shocking, stealing her breath. Vaughn kicked off his boots and dove into the frigid water without hesitation. The current immediately attempted to throw him off course, but powerful strokes brought him alongside the wagon just as it struck a submerged boulder and began to tip further. "Hand me the child," he shouted, reaching up toward the terrified woman. Hannah hesitated only a fraction of a second before making the hardest decision of her life. She kissed Lily's forehead quickly, then extended the sobbing child toward the stranger. "Take her. Please save my daughter." Vaughn grabbed the little girl, who screamed and reached back for her mother. "I'll come back for you," he promised the woman, his eyes locking with hers for a brief, intense moment. There was something in those blue eyes that made Hannah believe him. With powerful kicks, Vaughn maneuvered toward the shore, the child clinging to his neck so tightly he could barely breathe. Behind him, he heard the sickening crack of wood as the wagon struck another rock. The woman screamed, and Vaughn forced himself to focus only on reaching the bank with the child. His feet finally found purchase on the riverbed. Staggering, he carried the little girl to safety, setting her gently on dry ground. "Stay right here," he ordered, already turning back toward the river where the woman's wagon was disintegrating before their eyes. "What's your name, little one?" "Lily," the child stammered through chattering teeth. "Lily, I'm going to get your mama. Don't move from this spot." The wagon had flipped completely now, and Hannah was nowhere to be seen. Vaughn's heart sank, but he dove back into the churning waters without hesitation. The current was stronger now, and debris from the broken wagon created deadly obstacles. A floating barrel nearly struck his head as he swam downstream, searching desperately for any sign of the woman. He spotted a flash of color beneath the surface, the blue fabric of her dress. Without hesitation, Vaughn dove deeper, the cold water burning his lungs as he reached for her. His fingers caught fabric and he pulled with all his might, dragging the limp form toward the surface. Hannah's face was pale, her eyes closed as Vaughn wrapped one arm around her chest and used his other to fight the current. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest as he battled the river, refusing to let it claim another victim. Not today, not this woman. When his feet finally found the riverbed again, Vaughn nearly collapsed with relief. He stumbled to shore, laying Hannah gently on the grassy bank. She wasn't breathing, no, he muttered, turning her onto her side and pounding her back firmly. Come on, madam, your little girl needs you. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then Hannah convulsed, coughing up river water. She gasped, drawing precious air into her lungs as color slowly returned to her face. Lily, she choked out, her eyes wild with fear. She's safe, Vaughn assured her, gesturing to where the little girl sat sobbing a few yards away. Upon seeing her mother, Lily ran to them, flinging herself onto Hannah's wet form. Mama, Mama, Hannah wrapped trembling arms around her daughter, tears mixing with river water on her face. Thank God, she whispered, looking up at the stranger who'd saved them both. Thank you, we would have died without your help, Vaughn nodded, suddenly aware of his soaking clothes and exhausted muscles. Vaughn Zimmerman, he introduced himself, pushing wet hair from his forehead. My ranch is about 2 miles east of here. We should get you both warm and dry before you catch your death. Hannah tried to stand but faltered, her legs unsteady beneath her sodden skirts. Without asking permission, Vaughn scooped her into his arms, balancing her weight easily despite his own exhaustion. I can walk, she protested weakly. Maybe tomorrow, he replied with the hint of a smile. Today you've done enough fighting for your life, he turned to Lily. Can you follow us, little lady? It's not far. Lily nodded solemnly, clutching her waterlogged doll. As they made their way up the riverbank, Hannah realized with a sinking heart that everything she owned was either destroyed or floating downstream toward the Missouri River. My wagon, she whispered, all our supplies. Things can be replaced, Vaughn said simply. Lives can't. As they crested the hill, Hannah saw Vaughn's horse waiting patiently where he'd left it. The massive buckskin stallion eyed them curiously as Vaughn carefully set Hannah down and helped her into the saddle. I never properly introduced myself, she said, suddenly conscious of how inappropriate it was to be riding a stranger's horse while dripping wet. Hannah Atwood. My daughter Lily and I were heading to Bozeman. Vaughn lifted Lily up to sit in front of her mother, then took the horse's reins and began leading them eastward. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Atwood, though I wish it had been under better circumstances. Miss, Hannah corrected automatically. My husband died last winter. Something flickered across Vaughn's face, sympathy perhaps, or understanding. I'm sorry to hear that. They traveled in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Lily eventually dozed against her mother's chest, exhausted from their ordeal. Hannah studied their rescuer as he walked ahead, leading the horse along a narrow trail. His broad shoulders strained against his wet shirt, and his stride was confident despite what he'd just endured. There was something reassuring about his presence that made Hannah feel safe for the first time in months. Vaughn's ranch appeared as they rounded a stand of pines, a modest, but well-maintained 2-story house with several outbuildings and corrals. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Hannah nearly wept at the sight, knowing warmth awaited them inside. An older man emerged from the barn as they approached, his weathered face registering surprise. Vaughn, what in tarnation happened to you? River Rescue, Frank, Vaughn called. Can you stable thunder while I get these ladies inside? Frank hurried forward to take the horse's reins. Of course, boss. Madam, he acknowledged Hannah with a respectful nod. Vaughn helped Hannah and Lily down from the horse. Hannah's legs nearly buckled beneath her, and she leaned heavily against him as they made their way to the house. The interior was simply furnished but clean and welcoming. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, and Hannah nearly sobbed with relief at the warmth that enveloped them as they entered. My housekeeper, Mrs. Benson, is visiting her sister in town, Vaughn explained, leading them toward the fire. But I can find you both some dry clothes. They'll be too big, but they'll serve until yours dry out. He disappeared upstairs, returning moments later with flannel shirts and woolen trousers. The bedroom at the top of the stairs has a privacy screen where you can change. I'll heat some soup. Hannah nodded gratefully, taking Lily's hand and the offered clothing. In the upstairs bedroom, she peeled off their wet garments, wringing them out before hanging them over the screen. Lily disappeared in Vaughn's smallest shirt, which hung to her ankles like a nightgown. Hannah rolled up the sleeves and trouser legs of her borrowed clothes, feeling strangely vulnerable in a man's attire. When they returned downstairs, Vaughn had changed into dry clothes himself and was stirring something in a pot over the fire. His damp hair curled slightly at his collar, and Hannah noticed for the first time that his eyes were a warm hazel color flecked with gold in the firelight. "Feeling better?" he asked, glancing up. "Much, thank you." Hannah settled Lily near the fire, wrapping a offered blanket around her shoulders. "It's venison stew," Vaughn said, ladling the steaming liquid into bowls. "Not fancy, but it'll warm you up." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and Lily's occasional slurping. Hannah's mind raced with worries about their future. All their possessions were gone, swept away by the river. The money she'd saved to start a new life in Bozeman gone. The seeds she'd planned to plant, the tools, the winter clothes she'd sewn for Lily all gone. "You're thinking too hard," Vaughn observed, breaking into her thoughts. "Your forehead gets all creased up when you worry." Hannah sighed. "I'm trying to figure out what to do next. We lost everything in that river." Vaughn considered this as he refilled their bowls. "Where were you headed before the accident?" "Bozeman. I have a cousin there who offered me work in her dress shop." Hannah stroked Lily's hair absently. "After my husband died, there wasn't much keeping us in St. Louis. Bozeman's a growing town, good place for a fresh start." Vaughn nodded. "I can take you there once you've recovered from today." "I couldn't impose further. It's not an imposition. I ride to Bozeman twice a month for supplies anyway." He shrugged, as if diving into raging rivers to save strangers was something he did regularly. "My next trip is in 3 days." "You're welcome to stay until then." Hannah wanted to refuse to maintain her independence, but the reality of their situation made that impossible. She had no money, no transportation, and a child to care for. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Thank you," she said softly. "We accept your hospitality, Mr. Zimmerman." "Vaughn," he corrected with a small smile. "Anyone I've pulled from a river gets to use my given name." A ghost of a smile touched Hannah's lips. "Very well, Vaughn." As evening fell, Lily could barely keep her eyes open. Vaughn showed them to the guest bedroom, where a large feather bed awaited. "My parents' old room," he explained. "Not much use since they moved to Denver 3 years back." After tucking Lily in, Hannah returned downstairs, finding Vaughn at his desk reviewing what appeared to be cattle records. He glanced up as she entered the room. "She asleep?" Hannah nodded, settling into a chair near the fire. The excitement wore her out. She twisted her hands in her lap, still processing the day's events. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Vaughn set down his pencil. "But I did." "Why did you do it?" "Jump into the river, I mean. Most men would have done the same," he interrupted, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. Many would have deemed the risk too great. "Well, I'm grateful it was you who heard us." Hannah studied him curiously. "Have you lived here long, born and raised on this ranch?" Vaughn leaned back in his chair. "My father built this place with his bare hands, passed it to me when he decided ranch life was too hard on his joints." "It's a beautiful property. It's home." The simple statement carried a weight of meaning. "What about you? What takes you from St. Louis to Montana territory?" Hannah sighed, gazing into the fire. "After James, my husband, died, everything changed. The bank took our house when I couldn't keep up with the payments. I tried taking in washing and mending, but..." She shook her head. "My cousin Martha wrote that Bozeman needs skilled seamstresses. She offered me work and a place to stay until I can establish myself." "You're a seamstress?" Hannah nodded. "Since I was a girl, my mother taught me." Vaughn seemed to consider something. "Mrs. Benson was complaining just last week about the pile of mending that needs doing. Seems I'm hard on my clothes." He smiled slightly. If you're feeling up to it tomorrow, maybe you could help with that. I'd pay you, of course. Pride made Hannah want to refuse charity, but the practical side of her recognized the opportunity to begin rebuilding their finances. I'd be happy to help. The following morning, Hannah woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented until memories of the previous day came flooding back. Lily still slept peacefully beside her, thumb tucked into her mouth as it often was when she was deeply asleep. Careful not to wake her daughter, Hannah slipped from the bed. Her own clothes were still damp, so she donned Vaughn's borrowed clothing again, feeling strangely intimate in the garments that smelled faintly of cedar and leather. Downstairs, she found the house empty, but a fire already lit in the hearth and coffee brewing on the stove. A note on the table informed her that Vaughn was checking cattle in the north pasture and would return mid-morning. She was to help herself to anything she needed. Hannah explored the kitchen, finding eggs and flour to make a simple breakfast. By the time Lily woke, Hannah had breakfast waiting and had discovered a pile of mending in a basket by Mrs. Benson's rocking chair. "Where's the man who saved us, Mama?" Lily asked between bites of scrambled eggs. "Mr. Zimmerman is working, he'll be back later." Hannah poured her daughter a cup of milk. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" "I dreamed about the water," Lily admitted, her face solemn. "It was scary." Hannah pulled her daughter into a hug. "I know it was. But we're safe now, thanks to Mr. Zimmerman." After breakfast, Hannah found a sewing kit and settled by the window with the mending. The work was familiar and soothing, allowing her mind to focus on something besides their precarious situation. Shirts with torn seams, trousers with worn knees, socks with holes, all simple fixes that kept her hands busy while Lily played with a carved wooden horse she'd found on a shelf. The front door opened around 11, and Vaughn entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He stopped short at the sight of Hannah surrounded by nearly completed mending. "You've been busy," he observed, removing his hat. Hannah smiled. "It helps to be useful. Besides, I enjoy the work." Vaughn hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Mrs. Benson will be shocked to come home and find all her mending done." He crossed to the kitchen, pouring himself coffee. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, still a bit sore, but much better." Hannah tied off a thread and bit it with her teeth. "And you're the one who fought the river." "Nothing a good night's sleep couldn't fix." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "You're good at that." Hannah felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "Years of practice." "Would you and Lily like to see the ranch today?" "I need to check the rest of the cattle, and the fresh air might do you both good." Lily perked up. "Do you have horses? Can I pet them?" Vaughn chuckled. "I have 20 horses, little miss. And yes, you can pet the gentle ones." The prospect of leaving the house and focusing on something besides their losses appealed to Hannah. "We'd like that, though we're hardly dressed for it." She gestured to their borrowed clothes. "I'll have Frank bring the buckboard around. It'll be easier than riding." An hour later, they were touring Vaughn's property in the spring sunshine. The ranch spread across several hundred acres of mixed pasture and woodland, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. Cattle grazed in groups across the landscape, and several cowboys tipped their hats respectfully as they passed. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed, taking in the vastness of the Montana landscape. After years in St. Louis, the open space was both intimidating and exhilarating. "It's a good piece of land." Vaughn handled the reins with easy confidence. "Took my father 20 years to build it to what it is now. I've added another 100 acres since taking over. You've done well for yourself." Hannah observed the well-maintained fences and healthy livestock with an appreciative eye. Vaughn shrugged modestly. "I've been fortunate, and I have good men working for me." They stopped at a small stream where a group of young calves and their mothers were drinking. Lily was enchanted by the wobbly-legged babies, giggling when one approached the wagon curiously. "Can I touch it?" she asked. "Better not," Vaughn advised. "Their mamas get protective." Instead, he drove them to the horse corral, where he lifted Lily down to meet a gentle mare named Daisy. Hannah watched as he patiently showed her daughter how to offer an apple flat-palmed, his large hand supporting Lily's tiny one. The child's delighted laughter, when the horse's velvety lips tickled her palm, brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "She hasn't laughed like that since before her father died," Hannah said softly when Vaughn returned to help her down from the wagon. "Children are resilient," he replied, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary after she was safely on the ground. "Sometimes more than adults." Their eyes met briefly, and Hannah felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She quickly looked away, unsettled by her reaction to this near stranger who had already done so much for them. The tour continued with a visit to the chicken coop, where Lily was allowed to collect eggs, and the vegetable garden that supplied the ranch with fresh produce during the growing season. "Mrs. Benson manages this," Vaughn explained as they walked between neat rows of early plantings. "She has a way with growing things that I never mastered." "It's impressive," Hannah said, recognizing the careful planning that had gone into the garden's layout. "My own attempts at gardening in St. Louis were never this successful. Different soil here," Vaughn said, "different challenges too. The growing season's shorter, but the soil's rich where it's not rocky." As they walked back toward the house, Hannah found herself studying Vaughn when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet strength about him that she found compelling. Not just the physical strength that had saved them from the river, but something deeper, a solidity of character that showed in small ways, like how he spoke to his ranch hands or gently guided Lily away from a snake hole without frightening her. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Hannah and Vaughn sat on the porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The spring air held a chill, but Vaughn had provided a warm blanket that Hannah wrapped around her shoulders. "I've been thinking," Vaughn said after a comfortable silence. "About your situation," Hannah tensed slightly. "Oh, I know the shopkeeper in Bozeman who sells dry goods and fabrics, Jacob Miller. Good man, when we go to town I could introduce you." Hannah relaxed. "That would be kind of you. And there's something else." Vaughn seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I ride to the river crossing tomorrow to see if any of your belongings washed up downriver. Sometimes the current deposits things on sandbars." Hope flared in Hannah's chest. "Do you think we might recover anything?" "Can't promise, but it's worth looking." He paused. "Is there anything particularly important we should search for?" Hannah thought of the small trunk that had been tied to the back of her wagon. "There's a wooden chest with brass fittings. It contains family keepsakes, my mother's Bible, Lily's baby clothes, my husband's pocket watch." Her voice caught. "Things that can't be replaced. I'll keep an eye out for it specifically," Vaughn promised. "Thank you." Hannah pulled the blanket tighter. "For everything." "I don't know how we'll ever repay your kindness." Vaughn's profile was strong in the fading light. "There's no debt between us, Hannah." The way he said her name, with a gentle emphasis on the first syllable, made that strange flutter return to her chest. Hannah found herself wondering what it would be like to belong in a place like this, with mountains on the horizon and endless sky above. To belong with someone like Vaughn, whose quiet strength made her feel secure in a way she hadn't since James died. The thought startled her. It was too soon to be thinking such things about a man she barely knew, no matter how kind he'd been. She stood abruptly. "I should check on Lily," she said, though she tucked her daughter in securely not 30 minutes earlier. Vaughn rose as well. "Of course. Good night, Hannah." "Good night, Vaughn." In the safety of the bedroom, Hannah pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. What was wrong with her? She was a widow with a child, heading to Bozeman to start a new life with her cousin. Developing feelings for the rancher who'd rescued them wasn't part of her carefully laid plans. Yet as she lay beside her sleeping daughter, Hannah couldn't help remembering the feel of Vaughn's strong arms carrying her from the river, or the gentle way he'd shown Lily how to feed the horses. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of rushing water and a strong hand reaching for hers. The following day, Vaughn left early to ride to the river crossing. Hannah kept busy doing more mending and helping Mrs. Benson, who had returned from town and was delighted to find most of her sewing pile completed. The older woman took an immediate liking to Hannah and Lily, clucking sympathetically over their ordeal and producing a small rag doll from her sewing basket to replace the one Lily had lost in the river. My children are all grown with little ones of their own, Mrs. Benson explained as Lily hugged the new doll. I keep making these for my grandchildren, but they have so many toys already. By late afternoon, Hannah was growing anxious about Vaughn's absence. She tried not to show it, but Mrs. Benson noticed her frequent glances toward the window. He'll be back before dark, the housekeeper assured her. Vaughn knows these lands better than anyone. When hoofbeats finally sounded in the yard, Hannah had to restrain herself from rushing outside. She watched through the window as Vaughn dismounted. Untying something from behind his saddle, her heart leaped when she recognized the small wooden trunk, battered but intact. This time she couldn't help herself. She hurried onto the porch as Vaughn approached the house. "You found it," she exclaimed, reaching for the trunk with trembling hands. Vaughn's smile was warm as he handed it to her. Caught on a fallen tree about half a mile downstream, it was sealed well enough that not much water got in. Hannah set the trunk on the porch and opened it carefully. A wave of relief washed over her as she saw the contents damp but largely undamaged. Her mother's Bible with the family records inside, James's pocket watch, Lily's baby gown, a small portrait of Hannah's parents, and a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. Tears filled her eyes as she lifted the Bible, running her fingers over the familiar leather cover. "I never thought I'd see these things again. Found a few other items too," Vaughn said, gesturing to his saddlebags. "Some clothing, a pot, and this." He pulled out a small canvas bag that Hannah recognized immediately. "My sewing kit." She accepted it gratefully, checking inside to find her scissors, thimbles, and special needles still there. "With this, I can at least start working once we reach Bozeman." "There's more," Vaughn said, reaching into his pocket. He hesitated, then extended his hand, revealing several gold coins. "These were scattered along the bank. I'm guessing they're yours," Hannah gasped. It was the money she'd sewn into a hidden pocket in her trunk, $30 in gold that represented their entire savings. "Yes," she whispered. "Our new start money. Thought it might be important." Vaughn pressed the coins into her palm, closing her fingers around them. "Not enough to replace everything you lost, but enough to get established, maybe." Hannah was too overwhelmed to speak. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She stepped forward and embraced him, her cheek pressing against his chest as tears of gratitude spilled down her face. For a moment, Vaughn stood frozen, then his arms came around her, strong and secure. Hannah felt his chin rest lightly on the top of her head, and that fluttering sensation returned, stronger than before. "Thank you," she finally managed, stepping back and wiping her eyes. "For going back. For finding these things. Glad I could help." Vaughn's voice sounded rougher than usual, and there was something in his eyes that made Hannah's breath catch. Before either could say more, Lily burst onto the porch. "Mama, Mrs. Benson made pie." The little girl stopped short when she saw the trunk. "My dollies." The moment broken, Hannah knelt to show Lily the recovered treasures. Over her daughter's head, she met Vaughn's gaze and smiled tremulously, hoping he could read the depth of her gratitude in her expression. That night, dinner was a cheerful affair. Mrs. Benson had indeed made pie apple with cinnamon, and Hannah realized it was the first truly happy meal they'd had since James's death. Lily chattered excitedly about the horses she'd seen and the new doll Mrs. Benson had given her, while Vaughn and the housekeeper exchanged amused glances over the child's enthusiasm. "We ride to Bozeman tomorrow," Vaughn reminded Hannah as they finished eating. "It's about 4 hours by wagon. We should leave after breakfast." Reality intruded on Hannah's contentment. Tomorrow they would go to Bozeman, to her cousin's house and the new life she'd planned. Away from this ranch that had been their sanctuary and away from the man who'd saved them. "Of course," she said, trying to hide her sudden reluctance. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "No imposition," Mrs. Benson insisted, patting Hannah's hand. "It's been lovely having a child's laughter in this house again." Later, as Hannah packed their few recovered belongings and the clothes Mrs. Benson had altered to fit her and Lily, she found herself fighting unexpected tears. They had only been at the ranch for 3 days, yet already it felt more like home than anywhere she'd been since losing her husband. Downstairs, She could hear Vaughn's deep voice and Mrs. Benson's lighter tones as they discussed ranch business. The homely sounds made her chest ache with longing for something she couldn't quite name. The journey to Bozeman the next morning began under clear skies. Vaughn drove the wagon with Hannah beside him and Lily between them, the child still clutching her new doll. Their recovered trunk and the supplies Vaughn insisted on providing, including flour, sugar, coffee, and dried meat, were secured in the wagon bed. As the ranch disappeared behind them, Hannah felt a strange sense of loss. "Your home is beautiful," she said softly. "You must love it very much." Vaughn's eyes remained on the road ahead. "It's the only home I've ever known. My grandfather claimed the land in '49 after the first gold rushes. My father expanded it, and now it's my turn to care for it. It shows. The care, I mean." Hannah adjusted her borrowed bonnet against the sun. "Everything is so well maintained. A ranch is only as good as the work put into it." Vaughn glanced at her. "Like most things worth having." The road to Bozeman took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, across several small streams, and finally into more settled areas where farms and smaller ranches appeared. Lily dozed against Hannah's side as the wagon rocked steadily onward. "Tell me about your cousin," Vaughn said after a comfortable silence. "The one you'll be staying with." "Martha is my mother's niece, actually. She's about 10 years older than me and moved west with her husband before I was married. She owns a dress shop on Main Street in Bozeman." "Atwood Fashions?" Hannah looked surprised. "Yes, do you know it?" Vaughn nodded. "I've passed it. Never been inside, of course, but I've heard the ladies in town speak well of it. Martha was always skilled with a needle. When she heard about James's death, she wrote offering me work and a place to stay until we get settled. Generous of her." "Yes," Hannah hesitated. "I haven't seen her in years, though, not since before Lily was born." Something in her tone made Vaughn glance at her sharply. "You're worried." It wasn't a question, but Hannah answered anyway. "A little. What if we don't get along? What if Lily is too much for her city household? What if my sewing isn't up to her standards?" "From what I've seen of your work, that last concern is foolish," Vaughn said matter-of-factly. "And as for the rest, you won't know until you try." His practical approach was oddly comforting. Hannah nodded, forcing her worries aside as Bozeman came into view ahead of them. The town was larger than she'd expected, with solid brick buildings lining the main street and wooden structures branching off on side roads. People bustled along boardwalks, and wagons and riders created a steady stream of traffic. "It's grown since I was last here," Vaughn commented, skillfully guiding the wagon through the activity. "The railroad coming through changed everything." Hannah clutched Lily, who had awakened and was staring wide-eyed at the town. After months of traveling and days at the isolated ranch, the noise and movement of Bozeman was overwhelming. "Which building is Martha's shop?" Vaughn asked as they turned onto Main Street. Hannah scanned the storefronts until she spotted a tasteful sign reading Atwood Fashions hanging above a large display window. "There," she pointed. Vaughn brought the wagon to a stop in front of the shop. Through the window, Hannah could see elegant dresses displayed on forms and bolts of fabric arranged by color. It was far more sophisticated than she'd imagined, and a new worry bloomed in her chest. Would her simple sewing skills be enough for such a place? "We're here, Mama." Lily asked, clinging to her doll. "Yes, sweetheart. This is where Cousin Martha works." Hannah smoothed Lily's hair, suddenly conscious of their borrowed clothes and travel-worn appearance. Vaughn jumped down from the wagon and came around to help them descend. His hands were strong and steady at Hannah's waist as he lifted her down, and they lingered a moment longer than necessary before he turned to help Lily. The shop door opened, and a well-dressed woman in her mid-40s emerged, shading her eyes against the sun. "Hannah, is that you?" Hannah stepped forward. "Martha, yes, it's me," she gestured to her daughter, "and this is Lily." Martha Atwood's gaze moved from Hannah to Lily, then to Vaughn, her expression curious. "We expected you 2 days ago. I was growing concerned." "There was an accident at the river crossing," Hannah explained. "Mr. Zimmerman saved our lives when our wagon was swept away." Martha's eyebrows rose. Good heavens, are you both all right? We are, thanks to Mr. Zimmerman's bravery. Hannah glanced at Vaughn, who was watching the exchange quietly. He's been incredibly kind, allowing us to recover at his ranch. Martha extended her hand to Vaughn. It seems we owe you a great debt, Mr. Zimmerman. Please, won't you come inside? You must be tired after your journey. Vaughn hesitated, glancing at Hannah. I should see to the horses. Of course, Martha nodded. Perhaps you could join us for dinner this evening. It's the least we can do to thank you properly. Hannah held her breath, hoping he would accept. The thought of saying goodbye here on the street was suddenly unbearable. That's very kind, Mrs. Atwood, Vaughn said formally. I'd be honored. Relief flooded Hannah. A few more hours, at least. Excellent. 7 o'clock, Martha smiled. Our home is just behind the shop. Hannah, let's get you and Lily settled. You look exhausted, poor dears. As Martha ushered them toward the shop entrance, Hannah glanced back at Vaughn. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture that felt oddly final despite his dinner acceptance. We'll see you this evening, she called, receiving a nod in return. The interior of Martha's shop was as elegant as it had appeared from outside. Fine fabrics, intricate trimmings, and beautifully crafted dresses filled the space. 2 young women were working at a cutting table in the back, and another was assisting a customer with selecting ribbons. My workroom is through here, Martha explained, leading them past the main shop area to a door that opened into a spacious room with several sewing machines, dress forms, and tables covered in patterns and fabric. And our living quarters are upstairs. She led them up a narrow staircase to a comfortable apartment. This will be your room, she said, opening a door to reveal a small but pleasant bedroom with 2 beds. I hope you don't mind sharing until we can arrange something more permanent. It's lovely, Hannah assured her, though in truth the room felt confining after the spacious ranch house. Thank you for taking us in, Martha. Family helps family, Martha replied, though something in her tone sounded slightly rehearsed. Now, why don't you both wash up and rest? I'll have some tea sent up and we can talk more later. When Martha had gone, Lily explored the room, touching the floral bedspread and peering out the window at the street below. It's noisy here, Mama. Yes, it is. Hannah sat on one of the beds, suddenly exhausted, but we'll get used to it. I like the ranch better, Lily declared, and Mr. Vaughn. Hannah couldn't disagree with either statement. Mr. Zimmerman was very kind to us. Are we going to see him again after dinner? The innocent question pierced Hannah's heart. No, sweetheart. Mr. Zimmerman has his ranch to run, but we'll see him at dinner tonight to say thank you. Lily's face fell. But I want to see the horses again. There are other horses in town, Hannah said, trying to sound cheerful, and you'll make new friends here. But as they washed away the dust of travel and changed into the clean clothes Martha provided, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing a door that had barely had time to open. Dinner that evening was an elegant affair. Martha's home was tastefully furnished with items that spoke of prosperity: polished silver, fine china, and lace tablecloths. Her husband, George, was a banker with a prosperous business in town, and their 2 teenage sons were away at school in Denver. Vaughn arrived precisely at 7, looking uncomfortable but handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed. He'd brought a gift, a small wooden horse that he presented to Lily. Carved it myself, he explained as the child exclaimed in delight. Thought you might like a reminder of the ranch. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Lily clutched the toy to her chest. Is it like thunder? Just like him, Vaughn confirmed with a gentle smile that transformed his usually serious face. Hannah's heart twisted painfully. In just a few days, this man had connected with her daughter in a way few adults ever managed. And with her as well, if she was honest with herself. Throughout dinner, Hannah observed the dynamics at the table. Martha was gracious but slightly reserved, while George was friendly in a businesslike way. They asked Vaughn about his ranch operations with genuine interest, and he spoke knowledgeably about cattle prices and breeding programs. 1,500 head this year, he was saying in response to George's question. Planning to expand to 2,000 next season if the market holds. Impressive operation, George nodded approvingly. You must employ quite a few men. 12 full-time, more during roundup and branding. As they talked, Hannah noticed how different Vaughn seemed in this setting, more formal, less relaxed than he'd been at the ranch. Yet there was still that underlying strength and integrity that had drawn her to him from the beginning. When the meal ended, George invited Vaughn to his study for brandy, while Martha took Hannah and a sleepy Lily upstairs. "He seems like a good man," Martha commented as she helped Hannah prepare Lily for bed. "Very respectable." "He is," Hannah agreed softly. "We owe him our lives." Martha gave her a shrewd look. "Is there something between you two? I noticed how he watches you." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "No, nothing like that. We barely know each other." Martha didn't sound convinced. "Well, it's probably for the best. You need to establish yourself here before thinking about such things." Later, after Lily was asleep and Martha had retired to her room, Hannah slipped downstairs, hoping for a moment alone with Vaughn before he left. She found him in the entry hall, accepting his hat from George. "I'll walk Mr. Zimmerman out," Hannah said quickly. On the front porch, the evening air was cool and filled with the sounds of the town settling for the night, so different from the ranch's peaceful silence. "Your cousin and her husband seem like good people," Vaughn said, turning to face her. "Yes, they've been very generous." Hannah clasped her hands tightly together. "When do you return to the ranch?" "First thing tomorrow. Spring's a busy time." Hannah nodded, searching for words that wouldn't come. "How did you thank someone for saving your life?" "For showing kindness when you needed it most. For making you feel things you thought had died with your husband." "Hannah," Vaughn began, then stopped, seeming equally at a loss. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I want you to have this, in case you need anything." She took it reflexively, feeling the weight of coins inside. "I can't accept this. You've done so much already. Please." His voice was firm. "It would make me feel better knowing you have it. Consider it payment for the mending you did." Hannah knew it was far more than her simple sewing was worth, but she recognized the pride that prevented him from simply offering help. "Thank you," she said, tucking the envelope into her pocket, "for everything. If you need anything at all, send word to the ranch. Frank rides to town every week for mail." "I will." She wouldn't, they both knew it, but the pretense comforted them. Vaughn settled his hat on his head, then hesitated. For a breathless moment, Hannah thought he might say something more, might express whatever was causing the tension between them. Instead, he simply nodded. "Goodbye, Hannah Atwood." "Goodbye, Vaughn Zimmerman." He turned and walked down the steps to where his horse waited, mounting with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. With a final tip of his hat, he rode away into the gathering darkness. Hannah stood watching until he disappeared from sight, then slowly returned inside, a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Hannah and Lily adjusted to life in Bozeman. Martha's shop was indeed thriving, and Hannah found her sewing skills were in demand, though she had much to learn about the latest fashions and techniques. Lily attended the local school, making friends with other children her age. Their room above the shop became more personalized as Hannah acquired small items to make it their own: a colorful quilt, a small bookshelf, curtains she sewed from remnants. Yet despite the bustle of their new life, Hannah found her thoughts turning often to the ranch and its owner. At odd moments, threading a needle, watching the sunset, hearing a horse's hooves on the street, memories of Vaughn would surface. His quiet strength, his gentle way with Lily, the intensity in his eyes when he looked at her. Martha noticed her distraction. "You're thinking of him again, aren't you?" she asked one evening as they closed the shop. Hannah didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Sometimes," Martha sighed, laying aside the ledger she'd been balancing. "Hannah, I've held my tongue, but I think it's time for plain speaking. Your Mr. Zimmerman seems like a fine man, but you barely know him. You're still vulnerable after James's death, and gratitude can easily be mistaken for deeper feelings." "I know that," Hannah replied, straightening a bolt of fabric with unnecessary care. "And he's not my Mr. Zimmerman." "Then why do you look like you've lost something precious every time someone mentions ranching or the Gallatin River?" Hannah had no answer. May turned to June, and Bozeman bloomed with summer flowers. Hannah's work at the shop earned her praise from customers and a small but growing reputation. She'd even begun designing some simpler dresses that Martha displayed prominently in the window. One hot afternoon, Hannah was fitting a customer for a wedding gown when the shop bell jingled. She glanced up, pins held between her lips, and her heart stopped. Vaughn stood just inside the door, hat in hand, looking as out of place among the feminine frippery as a wolf in a chicken coop. Their eyes met across the room, and everything around them seemed to fade away. "Hannah," Martha called from the counter, breaking the spell. "Could you finish Mrs. Peterson's hem before closing?" Hannah nodded, unable to speak around the pins. She returned her attention to the bride-to-be, trying to focus on the delicate lace she was attaching while acutely aware of Vaughn speaking quietly with Martha. By the time she finished with her customer, Vaughn had gone. Hannah tried to hide her disappointment as she cleaned up her workstation. "He left this for you," Martha said, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Said he was in town on business and wanted to deliver it personally." Hannah accepted the package with trembling hands. "Did he say anything else?" Martha's expression softened. "Only that he hoped you and Lily were well." That evening, after Lily was asleep, Hannah finally opened the package. Inside was a small wooden box beautifully carved with wildflowers along its edges. A note lay on top. "Found this washed up on a sandbar last week. Thought it might be yours." Hannah opened the box with shaking fingers. Inside lay her wedding ring, the simple gold band that had been on her finger when the wagon overturned. She'd assumed it lost forever, swept away by the current when she'd struggled in the water. Tears filled her eyes as she slipped it onto her finger, remembering James placing it there 6 years earlier. It had been missing for weeks, yet she'd hardly noticed its absence, so consumed had she been with establishing their new life. What did that say about her? About her memories of James? About her feelings for the man who'd returned this symbol of her marriage? Hannah sat by the window for a long time, the ring heavy on her finger, her thoughts in turmoil. The next morning, she rose early and went downstairs to find Martha already at work in the shop. "I need to speak with you," Hannah said without preamble. Martha looked up from the fabric she was cutting. "You've decided to go to him." It wasn't a question. Hannah nodded. "If you can spare me for the day, I need to. I need to thank him properly for returning my ring. Just for the day." Martha's knowing look made Hannah flush. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't keep wondering what might have been if I'd said more that night on your porch." Martha set down her scissors. "Hannah, are you sure? You've built a good life here in just a few weeks. Lily is settled in school, your work is flourishing, I know, and if he doesn't, if there's nothing there, we'll come back." Hannah twisted the ring on her finger. "But I have to know." After a long moment, Martha nodded. "Take the day. George can drive you out there. He has business near the Gallatin crossing anyway." "Thank you." Hannah hugged her cousin impulsively. "For understanding." "I understand more than you think," Martha said with a small smile. "George and I didn't exactly have a conventional courtship either." The journey to Vaughn's ranch seemed both longer and shorter than Hannah remembered. George was quiet company, respecting her obvious nervousness and focusing on his driving as the wagon rattled over the uneven road. As they approached the ranch, Hannah's stomach twisted with anxiety. What if Vaughn wasn't there? What if he was, but had only returned the ring out of a sense of duty? What if she'd built up their connection in her mind, turning a few days of kindness into something more significant? The ranch house came into view, looking exactly as she remembered. Smoke curled from the chimney and several horses stood in the nearest corral. George drew the wagon to a halt in the yard. "Want me to wait?" he asked, his first direct question of the journey. Hannah shook her head. "No, whatever happens, I'll find my way back to town." George nodded, seeming to understand. "Good luck, then." Hannah climbed down from the wagon on unsteady legs, smoothing her dress, one of her own designs, a simple blue cotton that Martha had insisted became her. She'd left Lily at school, unwilling to raise her daughter's hopes unnecessarily. As George drove away, the front door opened and Mrs. Benson appeared, drying her hands on her apron. Her face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "Miss Atwood, what a wonderful surprise." "Hello, Mrs. Benson," Hannah greeted her with genuine warmth. Is Mr. Zimmerman at home?" "He's out checking the north pasture fences with Frank." Mrs. Benson gestured toward the house. "But come in, he should be back for dinner." Hannah followed her inside, the familiar sense of wood smoke and beeswax polish bringing a rush of memories. The house was just as she remembered, solid, welcoming, unpretentious. "How is little Lily?" Mrs. Benson asked as she bustled about, preparing coffee. "She's well. She started school in Bozeman and loves it." Hannah accepted the offered cup gratefully. "She still plays with the doll you gave her every day," Mrs. Benson beamed. "Such a sweet child, and are you happy in town?" "The work is interesting, and Martha and George have been very kind." Hannah hesitated, but something was missing. The housekeeper's shrewd eyes studied her. Something, or someone, before Hannah could answer, the sound of hoofbeats approached the house. Her heart leaped into her throat as boots thumped on the porch steps. The door opened and Vaughn entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He stopped abruptly when he saw her, his expression shifting from surprise to something more complex. Hannah. Just her name, spoken in that deep voice, was enough to confirm what she'd felt in her heart for weeks. This wasn't mere gratitude or confusion. This was something real. "I received your package," she said, rising from her chair. "I wanted to thank you in person." Mrs. Benson discreetly slipped from the room, closing the door behind her. "You didn't have to come all this way," Vaughn said, still standing by the door as if uncertain whether to advance or retreat. "Yes, I did." Hannah took a step toward him. "Because when I opened that box and saw my wedding ring, I realized something." "What?" His voice was cautious. "That I'd been wearing it for years without really feeling its presence, and that I'd noticed its absence only when you returned it to me." She took another step. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Vaughn?" He remained still, but something in his eyes changed. "I think so, but I need you to be very clear, Hannah. You have a good life in Bozeman. I won't disrupt that unless I'm sure." Hannah closed the distance between them. "I'm sure that when you pulled me from that river, you saved more than my life. You woke something in me that I thought had died with James." She held up her hand, showing the ring. "This represents my past, a good past that I'll always cherish, but it's not my future." Vaughn's control seemed to break. In 2 strides he was before her, his hands gently cupping her face. "I've thought of you every day," he admitted roughly. "Told myself I was a fool, that you needed time, that you were building a new life in town." "I was," Hannah agreed, her hands coming to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms. "But it wasn't the right life. Not without you." When his lips finally met hers, Hannah felt as if she'd come home after a long journey. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck to draw him closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "What about Lily and your work? I won't ask you to give up what you've built." "Lily adores you and this ranch. She asks about both constantly." Hannah smiled. "As for my work, I can sew anywhere, even on a cattle ranch." Vaughn's answering smile lit his entire face. "I was going to ride to town next week to ask you to dinner, had a whole speech prepared." Hannah laughed. "You can still give it to me." "Later," he promised, pulling her close again. "We have time now." Epilogue. 1 year later, the summer sun beat down on the ranch yard as Hannah hung laundry on the line, pausing to rub her lower back. At 7 months pregnant, even simple tasks were becoming more challenging, but she refused to be idle. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Vaughn called from the corral where he was working with a young horse. "Says the man who's been breaking horses since dawn," she retorted with a smile. Their good-natured bickering was interrupted by the sound of childish laughter. Lily came racing around the corner of the barn, her blonde hair flying behind her, pursued by Frank's youngest son who was visiting for the summer. "Mama, watch what I can do." Lily called, scrambling onto the lowest rail of the corral fence with the agility of a child who'd spent the past year becoming thoroughly at home on a ranch. "Careful, darling," Hannah cautioned, though she knew Vaughn was already moving to stand protectively near his stepdaughter. Their wedding had been a simple affair in the town church last fall, with Martha and George standing as witnesses and Lily proudly scattering wildflowers down the aisle. Hannah had designed and sewn her own dress, a practical cream-colored gown that she could wear for special occasions afterward. The transition from town life to ranch wife had been surprisingly easy. Hannah had converted one of the unused bedrooms into a sewing room, where she still completed special orders for Martha's shop and created clothing for neighboring ranchers' wives who appreciated not having to travel to town. Vaughn had expanded the house, adding another bedroom for the baby and modernizing the kitchen at Hannah's request. The ranch itself was thriving, with cattle prices strong and new breeding stock improving their herd. "Letter from Martha," Mrs. Benson announced, coming from the house with the mail that Frank had collected in town. "And one from your parents, Vaughn." Hannah dried her hands on her apron and accepted the envelope, pleased to see her cousin's familiar handwriting. Martha and George visited regularly, and Hannah made the journey to town every few weeks to help with special orders at the shop. "They're coming for the Harvest Festival next month," she told Vaughn after scanning the letter, "and bringing fabric for the baby's christening gown." Vaughn nodded, his attention momentarily diverted by Lily's precarious perch on the fence. "Both feet on the rail, Lily girl," he instructed, using the nickname he'd given her. Hannah watched them together, her heart full. Vaughn had taken to fatherhood as naturally as he had to ranching, treating Lily as his own from the beginning. The child adored him in return, following him around the ranch and soaking up everything he taught her about horses and cattle. Later that evening, after Lily was tucked into bed with stories of brave cowboys and clever ranch girls, Hannah and Vaughn sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. His arm was around her shoulders, his free hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "Feel that?" Hannah placed his palm in a new position. "Someone's practicing riding already." Vaughn's face softened with wonder as it did every time he felt their child move. "Strong kick, might be a horse trainer in the making, or a seamstress," Hannah teased. "Don't assume it's a boy." "Boy or girl, they'll be perfect." Vaughn kissed her temple gently, "just like their mother." Hannah leaned into his strength, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, a near tragedy transformed into the greatest blessing of her life. The river that had nearly taken everything had instead given her a new beginning. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That day on the river," she admitted. "How different our lives would be if you hadn't heard our cries for help." Vaughn's arm tightened around her. "I thank God every day that I was there, as do I." Hannah turned to face him, her hand gently touching his cheek, "for the brave cowboy who dove into the river and saved us." "And found his own salvation in return," Vaughn murmured, kissing her under the vast Montana sky, their future stretching before them as boundless as the land they called home.